The hangar smelled of jet fuel and metal, a mix every pilot grew used to, but never ignored. Sunlight slanted in through the high windows, cutting long beams across rows of aircraft waiting like sleeping giants. Inside, the squadron gathered, uniforms crisp, boots clicking against the concrete as they shifted into formation. The air was charged not with tension, but with anticipation. At the front, Colonel Davis stood with his hands clasped behind his back. He had the posture of a man who had lived his entire life in command, chin high, shoulders square, eyes sharp. His reputation preceded him. He wasn't just respected. He was feared, admired, and occasionally envied. He had flown countless combat missions, logged thousands of flight hours, and carried scars no one asked about. When he spoke, his voice filled the cavernous hangar effortlessly. Gentlemen, ladies, this upcoming exercise will be no ordinary drill. It will be a test of skill, discipline, and adaptability. And I'll make it clear from the start, any jet, flown properly, can dominate this challenge. He paused, letting the words settle. The younger pilots straightened, eager to impress. Veterans nodded knowingly, some exchanging smirks. Davis's eyes scanned the room. Yes, you heard me correctly. Any jet will do. It's not about the machine, it's about the pilot in the cockpit. That's the lesson you'll take from this. You want to win? Prove yourself. Don't lean on the wings beneath you. Lean on your skill. A ripple of murmurs moved through the crowd. To some, the declaration sounded inspiring, a reminder that their abilities mattered more than technology. But others, particularly those trained on the Air Force's sleekest fighters, interpreted it differently. To them, it was a subtle boast that even if someone came at them in a slower, clunkier bird, they'd still crush them in the sky. Lieutenant Jackson, a fresh-faced F-16 pilot, leaned toward his friend. Any jet? Sure. I'd like to see someone bring a trainer craft and last longer than 30 seconds. Laughter bubbled quietly among his group. Davis ignored the chatter. He raised a hand, silencing the room again. The rules are simple. You'll enter the exercise zone with simulated weapon systems active. You'll track, engage, and eliminate as necessary. Every move will be scored. Speed, precision, and situational awareness will separate the victors from the rest. And remember, survival counts. If you go down, you're out. The room buzzed with energy now. This wasn't just training. It was competition, and competition meant pride. Among the crowd, one pilot stood slightly apart, arms crossed loosely, eyes steady on the colonel. Captain Emily Reynolds. She had flown with the squadron for years, but rarely sought the spotlight. Her aircraft was the A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately nicknamed the Warthog. Unlike the sleek fighters around her, the A-10 was built like a tank with wings. It wasn't fast, it wasn't elegant, and it certainly wasn't glamorous. But Reynolds had spent enough time in combat zones to know what the Warthog could do when flown right. As Davis continued outlining the schedule, her mind turned over his words. Any jet will do. She could hear the condescension beneath the inspiration. Everyone in the room believed he meant fighters, falcons, eagles, raptors. None imagined an A-10 standing in the same ring. Her lips curved slightly. Perhaps today they would. The colonel concluded his speech with the authority of a man who had ended countless briefings before. Prepare your craft. Tomorrow at dawn we fly. Dismissed. Chairs scraped. Boots echoed. Groups clustered together, already dissecting strategies. Some pilots bragged about their maneuverability, others about their radar lock times. No one mentioned the A-10. Reynolds lingered, watching the colonel gather his papers. She could feel her heart thumping, not from nerves, but from the stirrings of a decision. She stepped forward, her voice cutting cleanly into the thinning noise. "Colonel Davis," she said. He looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Captain Reynolds. Something on your mind?" "Yes, sir." She kept her tone even respectful, but her eyes didn't waver. "Permission to enter the exercise in my A-10. The hangar went quiet. Heads turned. A few pilots stifled laughs. Others smirked openly. Jackson muttered, "She's not serious." Davis raised an eyebrow. He was a man who had seen boldness before, but this was unexpected. "The Warthog? You want to bring it into an air superiority exercise?" "Yes, sir," she replied firmly. "You said any jet will do." The colonel studied her, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. He thought she might back down under the weight of his gaze, but she didn't. Around them, murmurs grew. Some thought it reckless. Others thought it amusing. Finally, Davis nodded. "Very well, Captain. Any jet will do. Let's see what you can do with yours." The laughter resumed, louder this time, but Reynolds didn't flinch. She offered a crisp salute, then turned on her heel and walked out, her boots striking a steady rhythm across the hangar floor. As she disappeared into the sunlight, the colonel leaned toward his adjutant. "This will be interesting," he muttered. But behind the cool tone was curiosity. For the first time in years, he wasn't entirely certain of the outcome. The rest of the day unfolded like a storm of speculation. In the mess hall, pilots debated how long Reynolds would last. One pass, maybe two. Jackson scoffed. The A-10 wasn't built for dogfights. His friend countered. "She's a damn good pilot, though. You've seen her fly." By evening, the entire base buzzed with talk of the matchup. Even maintenance crews whispered about it as they checked their tools. Some quietly rooted for her, tired of the colonel's arrogance. Others bet on how quickly she'd be eliminated. Reynolds ignored it all. In her quarters, she sat at her desk, pulling out flight logs and reviewing terrain maps of the exercise zone. She knew the A-10's weaknesses. Speed wasn't her ally, but survivability, low-altitude maneuverability, and raw firepower, those were. She had flown close to the ground before, threading valleys and hugging ridgelines while enemy radar searched in vain. She had made the Warthog dance where no one thought it could. Tomorrow would not be about pride. It would be about proving that assumptions killed faster than bullets. As the base settled into silence that night, the colonel slept confidently, convinced victory was already his. Captain Reynolds, meanwhile, closed her eyes with a steady calm. Dawn would bring the challenge. And when the jets roared into the sky, she intended to make the colonel's words come back to him with a weight he never expected. Any jet will do. The Warthog would answer. The A-10 Thunderbolt II sat at the far end of the flight line, away from the polished rows of fighter jets that gleamed like silver blades in the morning sun. To most eyes, the Warthog was ugly. Its fuselage was squat and heavy, its engines perched awkwardly high above the wings, and its paint bore scars of long service. Compared to the sleek, aerodynamic curves of the F-16s or the futuristic edges of the F-35s, it looked like a relic of a different age. Yet for Captain Emily Reynolds, the A-10 was no relic. It was a warrior. She walked across the tarmac with her helmet cradled under her arm, the chatter of mechanics and pilots drifting in her wake. Their conversations weren't quiet, though they probably thought they were. "She's really going to fly that brick against Falcons?" Someone whispered. "Better bring a broom to sweep the pieces," another joked. The comments didn't sting as much as they used to. Reynolds had heard them all before every insult, every dismissal, every comparison to the faster, flashier jets. But the A-10 had been with her through more than exercises. It had carried her over deserts, mountains, and villages where survival meant flying low and taking punishment no other aircraft could endure. It had saved troops on the ground when precision mattered more than speed. She stopped in front of the warthog, resting her hand on its cold metal skin. The jet seemed to hum under her touch, as if it remembered the countless missions they'd survived together. A young crew chief, barely 20, approached nervously. "Ma'am, you sure about this?" His voice carried genuine concern. Reynolds glanced at him. His namatag read Hollis. She smiled faintly. "I've never been more sure. You take care of my bird, Hollis. She'll do the rest." The crew chief hesitated, then nodded firmly. "Yes, ma'am." "She won't let you down." Meanwhile, in the officers' lounge, the mood was lighter, almost mocking. The colonel sat with a group of senior pilots, maps spread across the table. They were reviewing maneuvers, discussing altitude strategies and radar coverage. Lieutenant Jackson leaned back in his chair, sipping coffee. "I almost feel bad for her. Almost. She's walking into a slaughter." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Major Whitaker, a seasoned F-15 pilot, added, "The Warthog's a flying gun with wings. Great for chewing up tanks, not fighters. Against us, she'll be a target, not a threat." Colonel Davis listened, not joining the laughter, but not silencing it either. Deep down, he believed the same. Still, something about Reynolds's unwavering confidence lingered in his thoughts. She hadn't flinched when she made her request. That wasn't bravado, it was conviction. "Don't underestimate anyone," he finally said, his voice cutting through the banter. "Overconfidence has killed better pilots than any enemy missile." The laughter died quickly. The room sobered, but only briefly. Within minutes, the conversations shifted back to who would get the first simulated kill. Reynolds spent the afternoon in the simulator bay. Not because she needed practice. She had logged more hours in the A-10 than most of her peers in their fighters, but because she wanted to run through every possibility. The simulation couldn't match the raw feel of flying, but it gave her patterns, data, and scenarios to adapt. She set the parameters to mimic tomorrow's exercise zone. Rolling hills, valleys carved by rivers, patches of forest, and an expanse of open sky. Fighters swarmed in her virtual display, diving, climbing, circling like hawks. The A-10 responded as it always did, slow, deliberate, but steady. Reynolds practiced diving into valleys, hugging the earth so closely that enemy radar lost track of her. She simulated sudden climbs, popping up at unexpected angles to fire her weapons before vanishing again. Her tactics weren't about matching speed. They were about patience, timing, and precision. After an hour, sweat dampened her flight suit. She pulled off her helmet and sat in the quiet hum of the simulator pod. A whisper of doubt crept into her mind. What if they're right? What if this is foolish? She clenched her jaw, pushing the thought away. Doubt didn't belong in the cockpit. The A-10 had never failed her, and she wouldn't fail it. Night fell over the base, and the hangars glowed under floodlights. Mechanics worked late, preparing the jets for morning. Reynolds walked along the flight line, past rows of aircraft resting like beasts before a hunt. She stopped again at her Warthog, its gray paint dulled by years of service. She thought about the soldiers who had cheered when the Warthog's gunfire saved their lives. The radio calls where desperation turned into relief when her voice came over the comms. That was what the other pilots didn't understand. The A-10 wasn't about glory or speed. It was about reliability. It was about showing up when others couldn't. She whispered softly to the jet. Tomorrow, they'll see. Back in the barracks, the mood was electric. Pilots lounged in common rooms, trading predictions like gamblers. 10 seconds, one laughed. That's all she gets. I'll give her a minute, another countered. She'd be evasive for a while, but no way she scores a hit. A quiet voice spoke from the corner. It was Lieutenant Harris, one of the quieter members of the squadron. You're all underestimating her. She's one of the best pilots we've got. If anyone can make that jet dangerous, it's her." The room chuckled dismissively, but Harris didn't back down. "You'll see. Don't laugh too hard until the exercise is over." Meanwhile, the colonel sat in his quarters, reviewing flight rosters. His pen hovered over Reynolds's name. A part of him wanted to pull her out of the exercise, to spare her the humiliation. But another part, the larger part, was curious. Pilots who asked for challenges like this often had something to prove, and sometimes those pilots reshaped the way the Air Force thought about tactics. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. "All right, Captain. Let's see what you've got." At dawn, as the first light bled across the horizon, the squadron gathered on the runway. The fighters gleamed like predators ready for the hunt. Engines roared to life one by one, the sound shaking the earth. Pilots strapped in, visors down, adrenaline surging. And at the far end of the line, the A-10's twin engines coughed before settling into their familiar growl. The sound was rougher, less refined, but steady. Reynolds climbed the ladder, slid into her seat, and pulled her helmet into place. Her hands moved across the controls like a pianist across keys, each switch a note in a song only she knew. On the tower, controllers exchanged glances. "She's really flying the Warthog?" one asked. The senior controller nodded, lips twitching in a smile. "Looks like it. This is going to be interesting." The colonel's voice crackled over comms. "All units, prepare for launch. Remember, today's about proving your skill, not your speed. Let's make it a good show." Reynolds tightened her grip on the stick, eyes fixed on the sky. She wasn't here for a show. She was here to prove that underdogs weren't defined by the opinions of others. They were defined by what they did when the challenge came. As the fighters rolled forward, sleek shadows racing toward the sky, the Warthog lumbered behind, heavy but unyielding. And for the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed the colonel's face. The briefing room buzzed like a hive of restless energy. Pilots filled the seats in rows. Flight suits zipped, helmets at their sides. Maps glowed on digital screens at the front, showing the exercise zone, a wide expanse of valleys, rivers, and ridges stitched across miles of airspace. Controllers tapped at their tablets, checking radar grids and simulated missile parameters. It looked like preparation for war, but to the pilots, it was something more: competition, pride, the test that separated talk from talent. At the center, Colonel Davis presided over the briefing with his usual composure. His voice was crisp, confident. "Remember the rules. Simulated weapons only. Every engagement is monitored. Every maneuver is recorded. You'll be judged not just on kills, but on tactics, teamwork, and survival. The exercise will end when one side dominates the other or when time runs out." The pilots nodded, but their eyes kept drifting toward one figure near the back. Captain Reynolds sat with her arms folded, listening quietly. The patch of her squadron caught the light on her sleeve, but she wore no expression. The A-10 pilot wasn't here to grin or banter. She was here to fly. The tension thickened when Lieutenant Jackson leaned forward in his chair and muttered, just loud enough for others to hear, "Guess we'll see how long a Warthog lasts when the Falcons sink their claws in." A few chuckles followed. Reynolds didn't react. She'd learned long ago that answering taunts only gave them life. Silence, she had found, was sharper than any comeback. Still, the words fueled the fire in her chest. Colonel Davis glanced toward the laughter, his sharp eyes narrowing. He didn't scold them, but the tilt of his jaw made clear he'd noticed. He turned back to the map, continuing as if nothing had happened. "Weather will be clear, visibility strong. Wind out of the east, minimal turbulence expected. That means no excuses. Each of you must adapt, engage, and survive. Remember, The battlefield won't wait for you to catch up. As he spoke, Reynolds's thoughts wandered. She pictured the valleys she'd memorized last night in the simulator, the bends in the river where radar signals thinned, the ridgelines where shadow gave her cover. Her A-10 wasn't built to chase, but it was built to endure. And endurance often outlasted speed. The colonel finished, setting his tablet aside. Dismissed. Gear up. Chairs scraped back. Pilots rose in a wave of chatter. The room filled with confident talk strategies, boasts, bets. Reynolds moved with the flow, but she remained quiet, her calm a stark contrast to the noise around her. On the walk to the flight line, the atmosphere changed. The air outside was cool and sharp, the horizon bleeding pale light as dawn stretched into morning. The smell of fuel and oil mixed with the crisp scent of grass and earth beyond the runway. Engines already rumbled in the distance, their growls and roars rising like thunder rolling over the base. As the pilots approached their jets, the ground crews moved like ants, checking systems, tightening panels, running final diagnostics. The fighters gleamed, their slender frames reflecting the rising sun. Each looked like a predator poised for the hunt. Then there was the A-10. It sat at the far end, squat and unyielding, its gray paint chipped, its frame broad and heavy. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon protruded from its nose like a declaration of purpose. It was not graceful. It was not fast. But to Reynolds, it was alive. She climbed the ladder with practiced ease, helmet tucked under her arm, movements efficient, unhurried. The crew chief, Hollis, met her at the cockpit. "Everything's green, ma'am." "She's ready." Reynolds smiled faintly. "Good work, Hollis. Let's show them what she can do." From across the line, Jackson and a few others watched with amusement. "She's really going through with it," he said. His tone carried disbelief, but beneath it, a flicker of unease. Whitaker shrugged. "Better her than me. She wants to make a fool of herself. That's her choice." Still, their eyes lingered on the warthog longer than they meant to. Something about Reynolds's calm unsettled them. Inside his F-16, Colonel Davis adjusted his straps, running through his pre-flight checklist. His fingers moved automatically, but his mind wasn't on the switches. It was on the A-10 parked at the edge of the line. He tried to dismiss it, to remind himself of physics, speed, thrust-to-weight ratios. But experience nagged at him. He had flown long enough to know that confidence, when paired with skill, was a dangerous combination. "Tower to all units," the controller's voice crackled over comms. "Stand by for launch clearance." Engines roared louder, shaking the ground. Reynolds flipped her switches, her cockpit lighting up in response. The twin turbofans behind her spooled up, their distinctive growl filling the air. To some, it sounded sluggish compared to the sleek whine of fighter engines. To her, it was a familiar song, one that carried the memory of missions past. "Reynolds, you copy?" Hollis's voice came through her headset. "Loud and clear," she replied. "Good luck out there." "Luck's for the unprepared," she said, a small smile playing at her lips. "We'll be fine." As the first jets taxied down the runway, the ground shook under their power. One after another, fighters lifted off, slicing into the sky with effortless grace. Trails of white vapor cut across the blue, marking their ascent. Then it was the A-10's turn. Reynolds eased the throttle forward. The engines roared louder, the plane rumbling down the tarmac. It wasn't fast. It wasn't sleek. But as the nose lifted and the wheels left the ground, she felt the familiar steadiness of her warthog carrying her upward. From the tower, one controller leaned to another. "She's airborne." "Didn't think I'd see the day," the senior controller smirked. "Keep watching. This is going to get interesting." High above, the fighters formed up, sleek shapes against the morning sky. The colonel's voice came over comms, steady, commanding. Form into wings. Maintain altitude. Eyes sharp. Reynolds climbed slower, deliberately. She leveled off lower than the rest, hugging the terrain. From her cockpit, the world stretched wide, rivers winding like silver threads, ridges casting long shadows, valleys waiting like open doors. She switched her radar to passive mode, minimizing her signature. The fighters were already climbing higher, racing ahead, confident in their speed. They didn't notice her hanging back, carving her own path. On the ground, the observers watched the radar screens. The fighters clustered together, their signatures bright and fast. The A-10, by contrast, barely registered, its low altitude making it harder to track. One controller leaned forward. "She's not playing their game?" "No," another replied, eyes narrowing. "She's playing hers." Back in the sky, tension simmered. The fighters' chatter filled the comms, cocky and careless. "Targets will be easy pickings," one said. "Copy that." "First hit's mine." But their bravado didn't reach Reynolds. She flew in silence, eyes scanning the valleys below, mind 3 steps ahead. She wasn't here to outpace them. She was here to outthink them. The colonel's voice finally cut through. "Stay sharp. Don't get sloppy." He glanced at his radar, searching for the A-10 signature. It was faint, almost lost against the terrain. His brow furrowed. For the first time, doubt crept in. Maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be as easy as he thought. The sun had fully risen by the time the exercise control center came alive. Screens flickered on, displaying grids of airspace stretching miles across rugged terrain. Controllers moved briskly, headsets on, eyes scanning the feeds. Every aircraft had been fitted with laser systems and sensors, recording every simulated missile lock, every cannon burst, every maneuver. On the ground, rows of radar dishes rotated slowly, ready to track the smallest deviation in flight. Colonel Davis entered the control room briefly before takeoff, his boots striking with authority. He surveyed the setup with satisfaction. This wasn't just another drill. It was a carefully orchestrated theater, designed to reveal strengths and weaknesses under pressure. Every mistake would be recorded. Every triumph would be analyzed. "Everything ready?" he asked. "Yes, sir," replied a controller. All aircraft linked, scoring calibrated, engagement zones locked. No room for error. Davis nodded once. "Good. No excuses today." Out on the tarmac, the pilots prepared. They moved with ritual precision, strapping in, adjusting helmets, running through checklists. Each motion carried confidence, even arrogance, the kind that came from flying some of the most advanced aircraft in the world. Reynolds sat in the cockpit of her A-10, isolated at the far edge of the line. She slid her visor down, eyes hidden behind the reflective shield, her breathing slow and measured. Her fingers traced over familiar switches, each click like a metronome, calming her nerves. The A-10 hummed to life around her, not sleek or refined, but steady, dependable. "Captain Reynolds, comms check," came a voice through her headset. "Reading you clear," she replied, voice level. "Systems nominal. Sensors active. Good hunting." Her lips curved faintly. Hunting wasn't exactly the right word. She wasn't here to chase. She was here to endure, to wait, to strike when the opening came. Inside the F-16, Jackson grinned as he adjusted his gloves. "This is going to be fun," he said over private comms to his wingman. "Poor Reynolds won't last a minute. Let's make sure we're the ones who bag her first," his wingman chuckled. "Copy that. Just don't let the colonel get to her first. He'll want bragging rights." They laughed, but beneath the humor was competition sharp enough to cut steel. Every pilot wanted the first kill. Every pilot wanted the glory. Colonel Davis's voice cut through their chatter, authoritative and crisp. Keep the comms professional. Save your jokes for the lounge. Out here, you stay focused. The laughter died instantly. The colonel wasn't one for idle banter once wheels were off the ground. The tower called over open comms. Attention all units. Stand by for exercise parameters. Every cockpit fell into silence. The exercise director's voice filled the channel, steady and formal. Simulation begins at grid 7 Bravo, extending north to grid 10 Delta. Engagement altitude is unrestricted. Simulated missiles will register lock within designated range. Cannon strikes register based on target vector and position. Kills will be confirmed by control. If your systems register destruction, disengage immediately and return to base. The exercise will terminate when one side achieves dominance or after 90 minutes of engagement. The words rolled across the airwaves like stone. Every pilot listened intently. 90 minutes of combat wasn't long, but in the air, it could feel like eternity. The director continued. All pilots will launch in pairs, except Colonel Davis, who will lead Alpha Group. Captain Reynolds will launch independently. Exercise begins at 0900. Launch sequence in 5 minutes. The channel clicked off. Silence followed, broken only by the rumble of engines. In the tower, a controller shook his head. She's flying solo? Against all those fighters? Another shrugged. Her choice. She insisted. Guess we'll see if the Warthog lives up to its name. But the senior officer, an old hand with decades of radar watching, leaned closer to the glass. His eyes followed the squad A-10 at the end of the runway. She's not thinking like them, he said quietly. She's not going up there to play their game. She's setting up her own. Reynolds inhaled deeply, exhaled slower. The A-10 vibrated around her, the seat humming faintly beneath her as systems completed their checks. She glanced at the photo taped to her panel. 2 soldiers crouched beside her jet during a deployment years ago, dust swirling around them. Both had survived that day because of her gun runs. That memory fueled her more than any taunt could. She keyed her comm. Tower, this is Warthog 1. Standing by. Copy, Warthog 1, you're last in sequence. She smiled faintly. That's fine. I don't mind being last. Across the runway, Davis watched from his cockpit. His visor hid his expression, but his thoughts were sharp. He remembered younger days, when he'd been the one flying something others mocked, the one who'd had to prove himself in the skies. Reynolds reminded him of that, though he'd never admit it aloud. Still, he thought, her Warthog didn't stand a chance against his Falcons. He was certain of that. Almost. Engines roared as the first pairs of fighters took off, wheels leaving the ground with thunderous grace. They climbed into the sky, sunlight glinting off polished wings. One by one more followed, until the air above the base shimmered with contrails. Finally, the tower gave the call. Warthog 1, cleared for takeoff. Reynolds eased the throttle forward. The A-10 rumbled down the runway, heavy but unyielding. The nose lifted, the wheels broke free, and the squat jet climbed steadily into the sky. Unlike the fighters, there was no sleek ascent, no sharp flare of power. But the Warthog didn't need elegance. It needed endurance. And endurance, Reynolds knew, often outlasted speed. Controllers leaned over their screens, tracking signatures. The fighters blazed bright across the radar, fast and clustered. The A-10 barely registered, its low altitude blurring with the ground return. Look at that, one murmured. She's already hugging terrain. She's hiding, another said. No, the senior officer corrected. She's waiting. Over open comms, Colonel Davis's voice carried authority. All units, form up. Spread across grid 7. Eyes open. Copy. the chorus of voices replied. Reynolds's voice did not join them. She had cut her comms to minimal, her focus on her instruments, her eyes on the earth below. She wasn't interested in their chatter. She was interested in the silence between their words, the gaps in their formation, the blind spots they didn't know they had. She checked her systems one final time. Guns armed, sensors calibrated, countermeasures primed. Her heart beat steady, each thump a drum of focus. In the control center, a hush settled. All signatures were now in the zone. Controllers watched intently, hands poised above consoles, ready to mark kills and maneuvers. The air crackled with anticipation. Colonel Davis's voice came one last time. Exercise begins. Now, the sky erupted into motion. The exercise had barely begun when the fighters scattered like sparks from a flame. Colonel Davis led the first push, his F-16 slicing upward in a steep climb, contrail streaking against the pale morning sky. His wingmen fanned out in precise formation, climbing fast, seeking altitude advantage. From above, dominance often came quickly. Their radar scopes glowed with targets, each one feeding into their helmets, each lock on a simulated promise of destruction. The colonel's voice echoed across comms. Spread your wings, cover the grid, hunt. The word hit the air like a challenge. Every pilot surged forward with eager intent. Reynolds, in contrast, remained low. Her A-10 hugged the terrain, weaving between ridges and valleys, where radar returns flickered and faltered. She felt the drag of the earth beneath her wings, the closeness of ground that could both shield and destroy. To the untrained eye, her jet seemed sluggish, clumsy, like prey running from predators above. But she wasn't running. She was positioning. Her eyes flicked across instruments, then to the sky. Contrails carved sharp scars overhead. The fighters were wasting fuel climbing, banking, circling high. She smiled faintly. Up there, they were hunters. Down here, she was invisible. Contact, multiple, came a voice over comms. One of the younger pilots had locked onto a radar return, though faint. Could be her. Engage, Davis ordered. 2 F-16s dove sharply, wings screaming, engines flaring. They streaked downward toward the valley, where Reynolds threaded her A-10. From their angle, the kill seemed inevitable. She was slower, heavier. They'd pin her in seconds. But Reynolds had expected this. She rolled the A-10 hard left, dropping even lower, so low the wings nearly kissed the treetops. The fighters overshot, their speed betraying them, their simulated missiles failing to track before their targets crossed into the no-fire minimum range. The control room registered the miss instantly. Falcon 3 and 4, missed engagement, a controller announced. The colonel's jaw clenched. Inside his cockpit, one of the pilots swore. She's slipping under us. Regain altitude, Davis barked. Don't chase, reset. But chasing was instinct. The A-10, lumbering below, seemed too tempting, too beatable. One of the F-16s pulled back into a dive, desperate for the kill. Reynolds anticipated the move, banking sharply into a narrow canyon. The fighter followed, closing fast. Too fast. As the canyon walls closed in, the F-16 pilot realized his error. His speed forced him wide, while Reynolds' A-10, built for low and slow maneuvering, hugged the canyon bend perfectly. The system registered a cannon burst for Reynolds' sensors. Falcon 4 down, the controller declared. The room erupted in murmurs. An A-10 had just scored first blood. In his cockpit, Colonel Davis felt the weight of silence. Reynolds hadn't just survived the first rush, she had turned it. And she had done it without panicking, without overreaching. He keyed comms. Focus, people. Don't underestimate her. She knows her machine. But his own words carried a sharp edge. He had underestimated her too. Reynolds exhaled, steady. The A-10 lumbered onward, its engines groaning but dependable. She adjusted her path, still hugging the terrain, still playing her game. She knew the fighters above were faster, deadlier on paper. But paper didn't decide battles. Patience did. Another pair of jets streaked overhead, sensors locking on. She ducked beneath a ridge, countermeasures flaring bright against the sky. Simulated missiles missed again, and the fighters banked wide. Her cum crackled faintly. "Nice move, Reynolds," someone muttered over a private channel. She didn't recognize the voice, but it didn't matter. Compliments weren't why she was here. She was here to prove. In the control center, the senior officer leaned forward, eyes sharp on the displays. "She's forcing them to waste fuel," he murmured. "Look at their burn rates. They're spending everything chasing her shadows." Another controller frowned. "But sir, she can't keep running forever." The A-10's slow. Once they box her in, the older officer cut him off. "She's not running. She's bleeding them dry." High above, Davis saw the trap forming. His pilots were frustrated, diving and climbing, chasing and missing. Each maneuver chipped away at their reserves. 90 minutes was the exercise limit, but fighters didn't think in 90 minutes. They thought in bursts of seconds, in instant kills. Patience wasn't their strength, but patience was hers. He grit his teeth. Pull back. Form a net. Don't chase her into the weeds. Force her up, but Reynolds had no intention of climbing. The earth was her ally. The ridges, valleys, and shadows gave her cover that altitude never could. She glanced once more at the photo taped to her panel. She remembered the ground troops depending on her in real combat, how low flight had saved lives. Today was no different. Another blip appeared on her radar. A pair of jets, one at high angle, one sweeping wide. A trap, she smiled tightly. Traps worked both ways. She slowed slightly, letting them think she hadn't noticed. The high fighter dove, the wide one angled in to cut her off. At the last second, she dropped flares, cut throttle, and rolled left. The high fighter overshot again, and the wide one broke formation to avoid collision. Her cannon system beeped once. Another lock. "Falcon 2 down," the controller called. Gasps filled the control room. 2 fighters gone. The A-10 still flying. Colonel Davis's silence grew heavier with each word. His pilots, once laughing, now sounded strained over combs. "Colonel, permission to double-team her. Colonel, we've got her bracketed. Colonel, quiet." Davis snapped. His pride burned, but his training kept him calm. He couldn't afford recklessness. Not anymore. Reynolds had already shown she'd punish it. He keyed a private channel to her frequency. "Reynolds," he said quietly, voice hard. "Enjoy your luck. It won't last." Her reply came smooth, almost amused. "It's not luck, sir. It's knowing the difference between speed and strategy." For the first time, Davis had no answer. Above the battlefield, contrails tangled. Fighters darted like hawks, but their prey below wasn't falling. The A-10 flew steady, resolute, a gray ghost weaving through canyons and ridges. With each minute, respect began to replace doubt. And somewhere deep inside, Davis realized something he hadn't admitted in years. He was being taught a lesson by the very pilot he had once dismissed. The first moves were over. The real fight was only beginning. The battle had become a storm of contrails and chatter. Fighters streaked through the sky in sharp angles, their simulated missiles lighting radar screens with pulsing threats. Controllers scribbled notes furiously, keeping track of locks, misses, and kills. The colonel's voice was clipped, precise, but underneath his calm commands was a strain no one could miss. Reynolds, flying low and steady, felt it too. Not fear pressure. Every maneuver had to be measured, deliberate. She wasn't here to outrun anyone. She was here to outthink them. The A-10 was no greyhound. It was a bulldog, patient, relentless, lethal at close quarters. Falcon 1, eyes on target, came Jackson's voice, his tone sharp with triumph. She's boxed between us. From above, the trap looked perfect. 2 F-16s sweeping down from opposite sides, faster, sharper, closing the distance like scissors cutting cloth. They were certain she couldn't slip free this time. Reynolds watched the radar blips converge. Her breath slowed. She didn't panic, didn't yank the stick wildly. Instead, she waited until the last possible moment, her hands steady on the controls. Now, she whispered. The A-10 dropped flares, then banked hard into a rising slope. The fighters overshot, their angles collapsing too quickly. Reynolds cut throttle, forcing them past her nose. Her cannon lock beeped once, sharp and merciless. Falcon 5 down. The control room buzzed with disbelief. Another fighter eliminated. The colonel's jaw tightened inside his helmet. "Colonel, she's gaming the system," one pilot complained. "No," Davis snapped. "She's gaming you. Stop rushing. Think." But his own heart thudded harder with every word. Each kill marked more than just points. It was an erosion of authority. He had declared boldly at the start, mocking her A-10. Now his men were falling to it, one after another. In her cockpit, Reynolds allowed herself one slow breath of satisfaction. Not celebration, never that. She knew better than to grow arrogant. Battles were lost the moment you underestimated your enemy. But she could feel the tide shifting. The fighters had speed, altitude, and reputation. She had strategy, terrain, and patience. Slowly, those were proving heavier on the scales. Her instruments blinked. Another radar sweep, 2 fast-moving contacts at different altitudes. She glanced up, spotted contrails streaking like white scars across the blue. They were trying to bracket her again. This time, she didn't run. She climbed. Controllers in the tower leaned forward as one. "She's climbing?" "She's breaking cover," someone said, stunned. "She'd be torn apart up there," but the older officer, the one who had watched her from the start, only nodded slowly. "She's not climbing to escape. She's climbing to strike." The fighters dove, sure of their kill. But the A-10's climb was deceptive. It wasn't a blind reach for altitude. It was a controlled ascent into their path. As they hurtled down, Reynolds rolled inverted, lining up her cannon in a head-on angle that no one expected. The radar screamed, "Beep, beep, beep," a solid lock. "Falcon 6 down," the controller announced, voice tight with disbelief. Gasps erupted across the room. The A-10 had just taken a kill head-on, against impossible odds. In his cockpit, Davis said nothing. His silence stretched across the comms like a shadow. His unit had gone from mocking laughter to strained breathing, and now to quiet dread. No one wanted to speak first. Finally, Jackson broke the silence. "Colonel, what's the plan?" Davis's eyes narrowed behind his visor. His pride screamed for an easy answer, a declaration of dominance. But deep down, he knew. Reynolds wasn't lucky. She was deliberate. Every move was calculated to use their strengths against them. For the first time in years, Colonel Davis realized he was fighting someone who wasn't playing his game. She was playing hers. Reynolds leveled out, scanning the sky. Her warthog rumbled steadily, reliable as ever. The terrain below stretched like an ally, the ridges and valleys whispering paths of survival. Above, the fighters circled warily now, no longer diving blindly. They were learning. But so was she. Her cum crackled again, this time with the control tower's voice. Warthog 1. Excellent maneuvering. You've eliminated 3. Keep your position steady. She almost smiled. Copy. Steady is what I do best. Inside the control center, tension hung heavy. Officers and technicians traded glances, whispering in disbelief. They had expected the colonel's unit to crush the lone A-10 in minutes. Instead, half an hour had passed, and the Warthog still flew, carving kill after kill into the record. The older officer finally spoke, his voice carrying quiet authority. She's showing them something they forgot, that an aircraft isn't just numbers on a chart. It's the pilot who makes the difference. No one argued. High above, Davis finally spoke again, his voice steady but edged with steel. All units, tighten formation. No more lone wolf runs. We box her in slowly. Force her where we want her. Yes, sir, came the replies, subdued but loyal. They regrouped, circling like hawks around prey. At this time, Reynolds didn't slip away immediately. She held her position, baiting them closer, waiting for the pattern she needed. It came quickly. 2 broke left, 1 held high. The gap opened just wide enough. Reynolds dove, hugging the earth once more. The A-10 thundered low, her cannon locking as one fighter turned too sharply, too late. Falcon 3 down. The room erupted again. 4 kills. 4. Against the colonel's elite. Davis gripped his controls harder, silent. He felt the sting in every muscle, not just as a leader, but as a pilot. He had dismissed her. He had underestimated the A-10. And now, with every passing minute, his silence grew heavier. The unit's comms had once been filled with confidence and jokes. Now they were filled with static and clipped acknowledgments. Their bravado evaporated. Reynolds, the pilot he had treated as an afterthought, was now teaching them all what mastery truly looked like. She adjusted her course, steady, calm. The Warthog wasn't built for glory, but it was built for war. And in this exercise, that truth was shining through. The unexpected edge was no longer a surprise. It was reality. And as the control tower watched in awe, and as the colonel remained silent in his cockpit, everyone began to realize this wasn't the A-10's fight to survive. It was hers to win. The battlefield sky, once loud with chatter, grew strangely muted. Pilots who had filled comms with jokes and bravado now spoke only in clipped reports, their voices heavy. The control tower, too, felt the change. Controllers who had scribbled casually earlier now leaned close to screens, brows furrowed, their pens moving slower. At the center of it all was silence, Colonel Davis's silence. Once, his voice had been constant, commanding, directing. Now he said little. He answered when necessary, his tone short, stripped of swagger. To his pilots, that silence was louder than orders. It was the sound of uncertainty. Reynolds noticed it too. For the first half of the exercise, Davis had spoken often, his voice sharp with control. But now, after kill reports stripped away his confidence, he had grown quiet. She smiled faintly under her visor. Silence in a commander wasn't just absence. It was hesitation, and hesitation was opportunity. She scanned her instruments again. Radar lit with moving dots, fighters regrouping. They circled more cautiously now, like wolves that had bitten too close to fire. She kept low, weaving among the ridges. The Warthog was steady, her breathing matched to its hum. Every second she stayed alive added weight to that silence. Falcon lead, fuel check? A pilot finally asked, breaking the uncomfortable quiet. 70%, Davis replied flatly. You? 64. The chases drained the lot. Another pilot chimed in. Same here. We've burned more than expected, Davis's silence lingered before his voice returned, slower this time. Maintain formation. Conserve fuel. Don't waste burns unless certain. To his men, the colonel sounded different. Not defeated, but cautious. He had lost the sharp edge that once kept them moving with fire. The silence between his words now carried weight. None of them wanted to admit they were rattled. In the control room, officers exchanged glances. "Colonel's tone has changed," one whispered. The senior officer nodded slowly. He knows he's losing control. His men can feel it. Pilots are like bloodhounds. They sense weakness even in their leader. That silence? It's the crack forming. A younger controller leaned closer to the screens. "Do you think she knows?" The older officer gave a tight smile. "Oh, she knows. Pilots don't just hear silence. They use it." Reynolds adjusted her throttle, watching two fighters sweep high above. They didn't dive recklessly this time. They lingered, waiting, circling. She understood their caution, but she also understood that caution was not their natural state. Pilots bred for speed and aggression didn't excel when forced to hold back. She could feel it. The colonel's silence was making them second-guess. She banked left into a narrow valley, letting the ground swallow her signature again. Flares deployed behind her, streaking against the sky like false trails. The fighters hesitated, unsure whether to pursue. "Stay high," Davis ordered finally. His voice was clipped. "Don't chase," but hesitation had already cost them. Jackson's voice cut in, frustrated. "Colonel, with respect, we're letting her control the board. We've lost 4 already. We need to force the fight." Davis didn't reply immediately. His silence stretched, filling the channel with tension. Finally, he spoke. "No, she wants you impatient. That's how she's killing you." Jackson exhaled sharply. "So what? We just circle until time runs out?" Again, silence. For Reynolds, listening quietly, it was confirmation. The colonel was faltering. Not in skill, his flying was still sharp, but in conviction. His silence was seeping into his men, draining them of confidence. Inside his cockpit, Davis's mind churned. He remembered his own words before the exercise, bold and dismissive. "Any jet will do." He had meant it as a challenge, a declaration of superiority. But now, with every kill called by the control tower, those words echoed back at him like mockery. He had underestimated her. Worse, he had let his men underestimate her. And now, every silence between his orders reminded him of that mistake. He clenched the stick harder. The colonel had always been sure of himself, always certain his voice could command victory. But in this exercise, his silence betrayed him more than words ever could. In the tower, the director leaned toward the microphone. "Colonel Davis, status check." There was a pause longer than anyone expected. Then his voice came, firm but thin. "All units operational. Continuing engagement." The director's eyes narrowed. He'd worked with Davis for years. He knew that tone. The colonel wasn't beaten yet, but he was shaken. And in aerial combat, shaken was dangerous. Reynolds banked right, scanning the sky. Her patience was paying off. The colonel's silence was fracturing his team's unity. She could hear it in their clipped exchanges, their lack of confidence. They wanted to press harder, but their commander's restraint held them back. She whispered to herself, steady and calm. Silence breaks more than noise ever could. Her radar pinned. Another fighter moved too close, too eager. She rolled into position, lined her cannon, and squeezed. The system beeped. Falcon 7 down. The control tower announced it flatly, but the silence afterward screamed. Inside his cockpit, Davis closed his eyes briefly. Another one gone. His silence thickened, filling the comms like a storm cloud. His pilots didn't dare speak now. None wanted to be the next mistake, the next casualty. He had started this exercise with laughter and boldness. Now he flew in silence, every word caught in his throat. His pride, once booming, was muted by the hum of his engine and the knowledge that Reynolds had beaten his assumptions into dust. The control center watched intently. One controller whispered, "Why doesn't he say something?" "Anything?" The senior officer didn't look away from the screens. "Because words won't save him now. Silence is all he has left." Reynolds pulled her A-10 into a wide loop, steady, deliberate. She felt no need to taunt, no need to gloat. Her flying spoke louder than any words could. She thought back to the colonel's challenge, his booming voice, his smirk, his dismissal. Now, that voice had fallen quiet. She almost pitied him. Almost. The A-10 wasn't supposed to win these fights. But in her hands it had. And the colonel's silence was the clearest victory of all. Above the battlefield, the fighters regrouped, circling warily, their movements slower now. Reynolds flew steady, her jet unshaken, her confidence rooted in patience. And still, the colonel remained silent. The man who had declared any jet will do had nothing left to say. The exercise sky was quiet now, but only because the storm had passed. The remaining fighters circled cautiously, wary of further mistakes. Contrails faded into the pale horizon, leaving the battlefield less a battlefield than a classroom. Every maneuver, every kill, every missed engagement had been recorded, analyzed, and understood. At the center of it all was the A-10 steady, lumbering, unstoppable in its rhythm. Reynolds flew with measured precision, each turn, each climb, each dive deliberate. No unnecessary movements, no wasted energy. Her craft was no longer the ugly underdog mocked at takeoff. It was a vessel of mastery, proof that skill and strategy outweighed raw speed and flash. Colonel Davis followed from above in his F-16, silent, his formation tight but restrained. His men mirrored his restraint, unwilling to engage recklessly, aware that any rash move could be their undoing. For once, the colonel had lost the luxury of arrogance. He remembered the beginning of the exercise, the smirks and the jabs. "Any jet will do," he had said, thinking the A-10's slow bulk could never compete. And yet here it was, dominant, not through speed or cutting-edge technology, but through intelligence, patience, and the unwavering skill of its pilot. The first realization settled in his mind like a stone. This was no accident. Reynolds wasn't lucky. She was exceptional. On the ground, controllers leaned forward, tracking the final movements. Their fingers hovered over consoles as if expecting one more miraculous twist. The younger pilots whispered among themselves. "She can't keep this up forever," one said. The senior officer only shook his head. "She doesn't need forever. She only needed the right openings. And she's taken every one of them." The last fighter approached Reynolds cautiously, wings slicing through the thin morning air. This one moved more deliberately than the earlier aggressors, hesitation etched into every maneuver. It circled, aware that the warthog was no longer prey. Reynolds adjusted her throttle. Sensors pinged, cannon systems armed. The A-10 lumbered into a slight climb, just enough to line up the simulated lock. "Falcon 8, down," the control tower announced. Silence followed. Not disbelief this time, but respect. Colonel Davis's headset was quiet. He didn't bark orders or issue corrections. He didn't need to. His silence now wasn't tension. It was reflection. He thought back to his own flights decades ago, the overconfidence, the mistakes, the lessons learned the hard way. He thought of the words he had spoken this morning, and how quickly they had turned hollow. Finally, he keyed his comm, not to chastise, not to command, but simply, "Warthog 1. Excellent work. The words, simple and understated, carried weight. In that brief acknowledgment, Reynolds felt the gravity of every moment, the doubt, the ridicule, the pressure, and the victory all converging. Her voice was calm over the cons. "Thank you, sir." Davis's reply was steady. "You flew that exercise exactly as it should be flown. Strategy, patience, control. Well done." For the first time, the colonel's pride was humbled, not broken, but reshaped. He had been outmaneuvered, yes, but not humiliated. He had learned something profound. A good pilot doesn't rely on the reputation of her jet, nor the assumptions of others. She relies on skill, judgment, and calm under fire. Reynolds descended toward the tarmac, the A-10 rumbling beneath her. Mechanics and crew watched as the angry jet touched down, tires skimming the runway. Hollis ran forward, wrench in hand, eyes wide with relief and awe. "You did it, ma'am," he said. She climbed down from the cockpit, visor up, hair tousled by the wind. She didn't boast. She didn't gloat. She simply nodded to her team. "We did it," she said quietly. Victory was shared, earned, and unspokenly understood. On the tarmac, the colonel waited, helmet off, face weathered and thoughtful. When Reynolds approached, he extended his hand. She shook it firmly, meeting his gaze. "You flew beautifully," he said. "Better than I expected. You reminded me, and everyone here, that skill is more important than speed, and patience more deadly than aggression." Reynolds allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. "Thank you, sir. I learned from the best," she said, hinting at the respect she had earned through experience and hours of practice. For a moment, silence settled, not tense this time, but reverent. Every pilot watching understood the lesson. Judgment and skill could triumph over assumptions, and respect was the currency of the sky. The control tower buzzed again, quieter now. "Exercise complete," the director announced. Warthog 1 scored the highest kills and survival metrics. Exercise debrief at 1300. The other pilots, once mocking, now approached with nods of acknowledgement. Jackson, who had joked earlier, gave a wry smile. "I didn't think it was possible," he admitted. "But you made it look easy," Reynolds shrugged modestly. "Easy isn't the point. Precision, patience, and knowing your limits, that's what wins." The pilots nodded, some silently, others with murmured agreement. The lesson had been delivered. Loud, clear, and unforgettable. Colonel Davis watched her walk toward the hangar, her A-10 resting quietly behind her. Pride mingled with humility in his chest. The exercise hadn't gone as planned, but in its unpredictability lay the true victory. Leadership wasn't about showing off power. Leadership was about recognizing skill and giving credit where it was due. He tapped his helmet. "Well done, Captain Reynolds," he whispered to himself. As the sun climbed higher, casting golden light across the runway, Reynolds and her crew prepared the Warthog for shutdown. The jet had survived everything the colonel's elite could throw at it. Every rivet, every panel, every gun system had proven its worth. But more than that, the pilot had proven hers. She looked once at the sky where the fighters had circled, remembered the maneuvers, the traps, the near misses, the victories. And then she turned to her team, quietly proud, composed, unstoppable in the calm after the storm. In that moment, the A-10 wasn't just a plane. It was a statement. And Captain Reynolds had earned every bit of respect it represented.